everyone, my name is Ava, and I'm going to be walking you through the What's at the Root activity for the Community Engaged Learning module that you're working through today. And the goal of our activity today is going to be looking at social issues from a broader perspective. So no matter what aspect of a social issue that you're working on, it's important that you look at the issues surrounding it as well. So looking at the root causes of social issues, other potential effects, and then also background information. So if you just came from the framing activity, you'll know that you have a frame, and that's the way you see the world and also the way people see you. And while individuals have frames, it's important to note that communities also have frames. So lived experiences, demographics of a community, history and community, anything that's happened previously. So it's important to keep these things in mind as well when we're looking for solutions to an issue. And it's also important to look at community issues as a whole, even if your community work focuses on one specific aspect of an issue, because it can help you better address problems or challenges, and also find solutions that use community assets to address the challenges that you're working through. So if we're thinking about a specific social issue, one that we can work on is poverty. So this is the example we're going to go through today, and then you'll have a chance to pick another social issue to look through on your own. So like I said at the beginning, it's important to know background information and potential causes and effects, as well as information about the community. Since we're looking at poverty today, and this is not delegated to one specific community, we're going to look at poverty as a whole. And then we can also talk about how it shows up more in certain communities and why that is in our causes and effects section. But as of 2020, 11.4% of Americans are living in poverty. So that's about 37 million people. And the rate of poverty is 16.1% among children under 18. And as you know, these statistics come from 2020 and a lot has changed since then. So COVID exposed a lot of people were on the brink of poverty, especially with the significant amount of job loss that occurred, and also essential workers having to continue working, but without access to childcare and other really important things that allow people to continue going to work. So we can keep COVID in our mind as well. So that can be a really important lens to look through that can help us see some of the systemic issues connected to poverty. And in case anyone doesn't know, poverty in the United States, or the poverty line, is defined by income thresholds. So it changes based on the number of people that are in a household. And I pulled the numbers for 4 people in a household. So if there's 4 people living in a house, the income threshold for the poverty line is $26,200. So in order to do this activity, and this is the same activity you're going to do later with another social issue, we're going to create a What's at the Root tree. And so basically on top, we have our leaves, which are our effects. And on the bottom, we have our roots, which are our causes. And we're going to fill in both of these and then analyze the tree based on how it looks. So the first one that we have on here is education. So having a lack of education can be a cause of poverty, but it can also be an effect. So if you do not have a high school education, you'll have fewer educational opportunities in the future. This also impacts the amount of money that you make, and the amount of money that you have impacts your educational opportunities. Job loss is another one. So this is one that we see all the time and can impact whether people are able to pay rent or pay their mortgage, and therefore impacts homelessness. But this is another one that's really tied closely together, because if you become homeless, it's really hard to get a job because you don't have an address to write down on the job application. Not to mention the insecurity of being homeless in general. So thinking about how those are tied together and then connected to poverty as well. This can also be tightly tied to food insecurity. Another example that we have on here is medical bills. So medical debt can be a big reason that people are in poverty. And it also can result in people being in poverty can result in people having less access to healthcare and less access to quality healthcare, or culturally appropriate healthcare. Um, Another effect is not being able to afford childcare, a lack of transportation or a lack of reliable transportation. Um, if you live in a city, you can use public transportation, but as we know, that's not always reliable. That's another example that we can tie back to COVID. Public transit shut down, which made it really difficult for people who rely on public transportation to get to work. Um, Social injustice is another one. Um, Homelessness, again, is a cause and effect of poverty, showing that cyclical nature of poverty. Not knowing a language, it's very difficult to get a job in the United States if you don't know English, but it's also hard to access any of the other services any other social services without knowing the language that you're trying to access them in. So, for example, finding information about how to go to a food shelf or a food pantry is really difficult if the information is not provided in your native language. Not having childcare. If you don't have childcare, it's very difficult to go to work because someone needs to be taking care of your kids. Another one is just the high cost of living. So we know that in major cities, the cost of living is higher, continues to go up with inflation, just the cost of housing overall, and then government policies. So depending on the social safety net, which we know fluctuates and is lower in the United States than in most other countries, that impacts how many people are in poverty. So these are all examples of things that can either cause poverty or are the visible effects of poverty. But with this tree, we can look at it and see that poverty is complex. So there's so many causes and so many effects, but it's also cyclical. So it's many of the causes and effects are the same. And we went through that on the tree, which ones could kind of go either way, whether they could either cause someone to go into poverty or they could be an effect of someone, that a hardship that someone faces because they've gone into poverty. But also, in addition to being cyclical on an individual level, it's also cyclical on a generational level. So the amount of education that your parents have greatly impacts the amount of education that you have, based on where you're living and the public schools in your area, or whether you are able to pay to go to college or get scholarships, which also greatly depends on your school district. And then the reflection question that I'm going to ask you all to answer before you jump on to doing this activity on your own with another social issue is, how many of these are within a person's control? So thinking back to that aspect of the American dream. So how many, we've all heard the idea of being able to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, looking at the tree that we created, and I'll go ahead and post the slide on here as well. But thinking about the tree that we've created or other ideas that you have about the causes and effects of poverty, how feasible is the American dream? And how feasible is it to pull yourself out of poverty on your own without the help of social services or without the help of a social safety net provided by the government? So that's something that you can go ahead and reflect on and then answer on your own. And then after that, you'll jump into doing the Padlet activity on your own. So in the next section, you'll see 3 different Padlet boards. And you can begin by selecting an issue area. So pick one that is related to your community work this semester. And if none of them are related to your community work, pick one that's the most interesting to you. And then in the bottom right corner of the Padlet, you'll see an add button. And that's where you'll add at least 3 causes and 3 effects to the tree. And you'll go ahead and add in those, and then you'll answer some reflection questions after that. Thank you all.